Well, good afternoon, brethren. I hope you don't fall asleep on me. If you do, you'll just hear me shout. Brethren, we're now at the end of the days of unleavened bread. And maybe later this evening or from tomorrow, we revert to eating leavened products. But brethren, that is not the intent of the days of unleavened bread. Because as I said before, the days of unleavened bread is not about eating bread, but it is about us putting sin out of our lives and becoming what Paul says is a new lump. Let us turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and just look at this again. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, and let's start from verse 6. Now, speaking of a situation that occurred in the church then, when one of the members, apparently, was having a relationship, a sexual relationship with his stepmother, who was not in the church, so therefore Paul did not address her. And apparently the church didn't see anything too much wrong with that. So Paul said, your glorying is not good. Know you not that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Meaning that that action that they allowed will eventually corrupt the whole church. In the same way that if you put a little bit of yeast or baking powder in dough, it will eventually leaven the whole lump of dough. So he was using that analogy of leavening a whole product to make the point to them. Know ye not that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Purge out therefore the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, as you are unleavened. And he was indicating here, as he later said, to put the man out of the church. But the old leaven was the practices that the society had, that people would have engaged in that didn't see anything too wrong. So he was saying, purge that out, put it out. Purge means to prune, to cut it off, throw it away, discard it, that you may be a new lump, a new unleavened bit of dough. As you're unleavened, for even Christ or Passover is sacrificed for us. And verse 8 he says, therefore let us keep the feast of unleavened bread, not with old leaven, not allowing these sinful things to continue, neither with the leaven of malice and wickedness. And the leaven of malice and wickedness, it speaks to our emotional, psychological processes. And even spiritual processes that we will see a little bit later. But with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So, in the physical sense of keeping the feast, you don't want to have the old you come to the feast with all of the negative things that you would have had. But you want to have it with a Christ-like attitude. And further, you don't want to come to the feast being your same self and not change at all. Not even reflect a little bit of Christ. Let me read something here for you. Here's what the Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown's Bible commentary says. Of verse 6 where it says, your glorying is not good. He says here, you're glorying in your own attainments and those of your favorite teachers, while the while you connive at such a scandal of the man having a sexual relation with his father's wife, his stepmother, is quite unseemly. So that was how Paul did. And he says, know you not that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? It says here, namely, with present complicity in the guilt and in the danger of future contagion. So while the church had apparently condoned this man having sexual relationships with his father's wife, apparently even while she was still his father's wife, to make it worse. The church didn't see anything wrong with that and allowed it. So Paul is making to them, that is quite an unseemly thing. It is a scandalous thing. And he even said, you know, let me go back and put it in the context there. It is reported commonly that there is fornication amongst you, and such fornication as is not so much as named among the Gentiles. The Gentiles will frown upon this, but you're accepting it. That one should have his father's wife, and you are puffed up. Again, he's using the analogy of leaven. Bread that is baked with leaven gets puffed up. He says, you are puffed up, and have not rather mourned, that he that hath done this deed might be taken away from you. So Paul is now upbraiding them here. Namely, this present complicity in the guilt of that person. By accepting it, you become complicit in it. And by accepting it, you too are becoming corrupted, and you're not recognizing it. It says here, and the danger of future contagion, meaning it is going to spread. So that this is one of the things that we must guard against, that we don't slip back into the things that we would have been in the past. Verse 7, it says, purge out therefore the old leaven. It says here, old leaven is the remnant of the old heathenish and natural corruption that you would have had. It says this, the image is taken from the extreme care of the Jews in searching every corner of their houses and, quote unquote, purging out every particle of leaven from the time of the killing of the lamb before the Passover. And some of the very religious Jews, as I said before, they would go down on their hands and knees and take a feather and clean their houses. Now you can appreciate it would take a long time to do this. But that was how meticulous some of them were. Unfortunately, they only saw it in that limited sense that, you know, it isn't possible in the first place to remove every particle. Because you have, you know, spores, etc. How you can't even see them. And particles can get so tiny that you can't see it. But this was the extent to which they saw it. And this is to the extent that they would go, of purging out every particle. So he says, so Christians are to continually, in the same way that they were as meticulous as going down on their hands and knees and using a feather, so Christians are continually to search and purify their hearts. It says, as you are unleavened. Not your house now, as you are unleavened. So that not merely your houses you must be unleavening, but you now must be unleavened. Which is why I said it is not about eating bread, it's about us putting the sin out of us. And it says normally, and as far as your Christian calling is concerned, free from the leaven of sin and death. And it says here, regarding the Corinthian church and the Passover, or regarding the Corinthian church as the Passover unleavened lump, as Paul says, you know, that you may be unleavened, that you may be a new lump as you are unleavened. It says he entreats them, now regarding the whole church as an unleavened lump. This is the ideal thing. There was an unleavened lump. But this is how he was perceiving them, or he would like to see them be regarded as. He entreats them to correspond, in fact, with their normal state. So don't just have it be conceptually looking at you as an unleavened lump, but you must be unleavened. So this thing that you have condoned, you must put it out. And later he told them to put the man out of the church. So it says, for even our Christ our Passover is satisfied for us. So that for Christ our Passover has been sacrificed for us. That is, as the Jews began the days of unleavened bread with the slaying of the Passover lamb, so Christ our Passover, having already been slain, let there be no leaven of evil in you, who are the unleavened lump. So Christ our Passover is already slain. We don't have to go doing it every year. He's already slain. And so as he is already slain, don't let it be in the same way as in the real life that how they practiced it then. You wouldn't allow your homes to stay with leaven all over the place. They go down in their knees, take the feather, clean it out, spend how many days. If they had vacuum cleaners then, spend however long doing it. In the same way you would do that, do it within yourself now. Whatever is in you, as it says here, whatever evil, whatever sin there is in you, go down on your knees, by praying perhaps, or fasting, but in the same diligence that they would have practiced, you do the same thing to get it out of you. Now we will gather, go back and eat leaven, and have leaven all over the place, but that is not intended with us. That is okay for the physical thing. But again, as I said, this is not about eating bread. It's about you putting out the sin. And when they said to purge it out, he isn't saying that you could go back and gather it again. No, it must stay out. It says here, for even Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us. It says an additional reason. Besides the one you're glorying is not good, that the little leaven, or condoning the sin of the man, is something that you ought not to do. But you have an additional reason, that Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us. And it says, a more cogent one, most greater significance for purging out the old leaven, because Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us. And it says, a more cogent one for purging out every leaven of evil, namely that Christ has already been sacrificed, whereas the old leaven is yet unremoved, which ought to have been purged out long ago. Now, when they approached the days of unleavened bread, the leaven was in the homes. But Christ is already sacrificed. So, the intent now that Paul is trying to get across, while it is okay to wait until however long before the days of unleavened bread begin, before you remove the leavened stuff, because Christ is sacrificed already. Because the literal thing is, they would have sacrificed at a particular point in time. But there is no point in time for us that Christ isn't sacrificed. Christ is sacrificed all along. There is no particular point in time at which he is doing it. Therefore, because of that fact, that he is already sacrificed, you now, in the same way that when the days of unleavened bread come, you go and you remove. Because Christ is already sacrificed, you don't wait until those days comes to put the thing and the sin out of your life. So that it is a continuous thing. You purge it out every time you recognize it. In the same way that you do it during the days of unleavened bread, do it all the time. Remove sin. Remove the evil that you see whenever you determine and you see it. Namely that Christ has already been sacrificed, whereas the old leaven is yet unremoved, which ought to have been long ago. And it says here, verse 8, not with the old leaven. It says, old leaven is our unconverted state, speaking as Jews then, or persons who were not Jews, who were called heathen. And as he said, let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, neither with the leaven of malice and wickedness. It says here, malice, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. It says here, malice, the opposite of sincerity, which allows no leaven of evil to be mixed up with good. So the leaven of sincerity and truth, but the leaven of sincerity doesn't allow any level of evil to be mixed up with it, because that reflects Christ. Christ doesn't allow any evil to be mixed up with him. The leaven of malice and wickedness, He says wickedness is the opposite of truth, because you have the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So he's now matching old leaven. So he's the level of malice, he's matching it now with sincerity, and wickedness he is matching with truth. So he says wickedness is the opposite of truth, which does not allow evil to be mistaken for good. And the Greek for malice means the evil habit of mind. Wickedness, the outcoming of the same word, of the same in word and deed. So you have the wickedness in your mind manifesting itself now in word and deed. So it comes out of you. And remember it says that which comes out of a man defiles the man. So if these things come out of you, then they defile you. And the intention is that Christ, our Passover, was sacrificed for us to cleanse you and purify you. Why do you go back then and want to defile yourself once again? So you have to go back again and get the sacrifice all over again. As he said, if we do it frivolously, we put him to an open shame. Now, it says the Greek for sincerity expresses literally a thing which when examined by the sun's light is found pure and unadulterated. So you hold up whatever substance, there are certain substances, you hold them up to the sunlight and you can say, yes, this is something that is pure. This is how we must become. Here's what the Wycliffe Bible describes it. It says the Feast of Unleavened Bread is illustrative of the believer's walk in holiness. A continuous thing. And so Paul writes, let us go on keeping the feast. That is how they translate it. He said, let us keep the feast. But the keep here is, as they said, the present tense, is the present continuous. Let us go on keeping the feast. So not that because the feast ends today, we stop doing whatever is that we have to do in the feast. Let us go on keeping the feast. You've purged out the old leaven, let us go on with the old leaven purged out, not that bring it back. Let us continue. You've purged it out, leave it out. And now let us observe it with the leaven of sincerity and truth, which is Christ. So he is suggesting now that the feast doesn't end today. It continues. But you're doing it now with the leaven of sincerity and truth, which represents Christ. It says, and just as a crumb of leaven in the house of the Israelites at that time meant judgment. I suppose the high priest could, if he found out that, you have forgotten perhaps what? A pizza somewhere in your refrigerator. The high priest then, you know how they were fastidious type of people. The high priest could have, expelled you from the congregation for a while. They had that kind of power. So just as the crumb meant judgment, so sin in the believer's life means judgment. So he's putting the literal now as to what would have happened with the spiritual thing, and the spiritual is greater. If in the physical thing, you could get judgment being passed on you for having sin, much more so now in you having sin in your life. And sin is a worse thing than having leaven. Leaven is just a symbolic thing. But the reality of it is that if you have sin, then and you don't make any attempts to remove it, then the consequences are greater. So brethren, we have looked at that, and Paul has given us directions and advice on doing other things. There are things that we must now begin to take closer look at. Let us turn to the book of 2 Corinthians. And let us see another aspect. 2 Corinthians chapter 7. think here they have perhaps broken up the chapter incorrectly. Let us go back to chapter 6. And let's read from verse 14. It says, "Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion has light with darkness? And what concord or agreement does Christ have with Belial or Baal? Or what part has he who believes with an infidel? And what agreement has the temple of God with idols?" So you notice how he is contrasting a believer with an infidel, one who couldn't care less or one who might be actually worshipping idols. What agreement does the temple of God, and it says you are the temple of God, have with idols? So if you are supposed to reflect Christ or the God living in you, but then you're still dabbling with idols, what arrangement, what agreement would somebody who has now come to the living God have with idols? The two of them, they're opposites. They can't coexist. You know, what concord does Christ have with Baal? Does Christ have anything to do with Baal? No. So he is now paralleling that. "For you are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will dwell in them and walk in them. And I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Wherefore, come out from among them, and be you separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you." And note the consequence of that. "And I will be a father to you, and you shall be my sons and daughters." And verse chapter 7 now. Against this background, here's what Paul is writing. "Having therefore these promises," what promises? Some of the promises that we mentioned here before. "I will be a father to you, and you shall be my sons and daughters. For you are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will dwell in them and walk among them and be their God, and they shall be my people." These are the promises God is making. So he is saying, therefore, brethren, having therefore these promises, dearly beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God. Now there's a whole lot of stuff in this verse here, brother. Cleanse ourselves from the filthiness of the flesh, and not just the flesh, filthiness of the spirit. Now you may say, how do you have filthiness of the spirit? Well, we'll take a look at that and see. Perfecting holiness. Note, holiness. As Chuck said, I mean, each one of these things could be a sermon by themselves. Perfecting holiness in the fear of the Lord. Now, there's some interesting elements of this thing. The word cleanse is katharizo, K-A-T-H-A-R-I-Z-O. I suppose from this we also get the word catharsis, where you purge out pent up emotions, etc. So you relieve yourself. You have an emotional, psychic, whatever release. It says to cleanse, to make clean, to purge. Purge out the old leaven, cut it out, put it away, to purify. And Paul is saying, let us therefore, brethren, cleanse ourselves. Let us make clean. Let us purge out. Let us purify ourselves from all filthiness. The word filthiness is translated here. The word, the Greek word is molusmos. M-O-L-U-S-M-O-S. And this says it is a stain. Figuratively, they say, it refers to immorality, filthiness. From a root, that means to soil, or figuratively, to defile. There was another aspect of it. They said it means black. I didn't include that. But you see. So, cleanse ourselves from immorality. Not simply just doing it, in the sense that you engage in it with other people, etc. Filthiness, but cleanse it from your mind. You know, the Chuck said that the church had a problem with people and pornography, which is already available online. But if the desire is not in your mind, then it is just pictures that it might be just, you know, looking at any other picture that you see and you just go on without focusing on it or even paying it too much attention. But because it has a hold in the mind, then that is where the problem comes from. So he says, get rid of that. Cleanse yourselves from it. Meaning, it is a stain, and you don't want to have stains on you. It is immorality, and it means to soil, to defile. So that, having a promise made to us, touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you, thus saith the Lord, and I will be a father unto you, and you shall be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty. You know, and what agreement does the temple of God have with filthiness, immorality? For you are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God. Now, how does that resonate in our minds? And this is a promise that God is making to us. You know? And Paul is saying, I mean, look at this promise that you have. God is saying, I will walk in you and dwell within you. I mean, he was saying it to Israel, but he's saying it to us too. And I will be a father to you, and you shall be my sons and daughters. This is God saying this to us, brethren. And if this has no impact on us, then what are we doing? We may as well go and live and be merry, for tomorrow we die. But God is holy. God is righteous. So God does not dwell with uncleanness. As he said, what concourse does God have with Belial? What does the temple of God have to do with idols? The two cannot coexist. So therefore, if you inculcate these things, these desires, these thoughts, these whatever, in addition to the practices, if you have that in your life, then these promises can't happen. You have to put these things away so you can be a beneficiary of the promises. All filthiness of the flesh. Well, the flesh is the normal body. It says here, human nature with its frailties and passions. And he's saying we must cleanse ourselves from these frailties and passions. They are there. But not because they are there, it means that we must give in to them. You recognize that they're there, it tells us they're there, but they are not something that overwhelm us and we can't do anything about. I mean, you know, we have physical things in life that somebody says to you, you know, you go to university, you come out with a B+ average, and I will pay your tuition fee. I will buy all your books for you. I will give you a car to drive to and from. I will pay your accommodation. I will buy food. Anything you need during that time. Will we do it? I think lots of us will. And all he's asking that you maintain a B+ average. We will do that. So, the greatest being in the world is saying to you, come out from among these things and be separate. And don't touch these unclean things. And I will receive you. And I will be a father to you. And you shall be my sons and daughters. How weighty is that promise in our minds? And by implication that Paul is saying here. The fact that we have received them, it means that they should be weighty in your mind. They should be in the forefront of your mind. That I will be a father to you, and you are going to be my sons and daughters. Not going to be down the road. That is how I'm regarding you now. So, this is the background that he's putting it in. They said, from all filthiness of the flesh and filthiness of the spirit. Now, spirit is the Greek word is pneuma. And it says the human spirit, the vital principle or mental disposition. So you have the human spirit, the vital principle, what motivates you to do whatever you do, drives you to do things physically, and the mental disposition now that you have when you are attempting to do these things. And brethren, we can see examples of people who have let this thing slip. We see it most clearly in athletes. There was an Irishman, one of the most talented players you could possibly see anywhere. He could take a football and dribble the whole opposition's team. His name was George Best. And we talked today about Lionel Messi and Ronaldo and Ronaldinho and Neymar. He could do anything they could do. I saw George Best dribble a whole about 7 men on the field and score. He scored 6 goals one time in a match playing for Manchester United. He never played much international football because he was from Northern Ireland, and Ireland wasn't that great a country. But if he had the opportunity to play in the World Cup, I mean, we would have seen, we talk about the dribble that Maradona made in 1986 against England. George Best used to do that all the time. That's the kind of player he was. He had those skills. But he also loved to party and to drink. And so he, after a while, when he got the notoriety, he stopped practicing. He wouldn't go and train. So his conditioning fell. And things that he once was able to do, he began to struggle to do, until the club fired him. They benched him because he wasn't fit. He wasn't fit. He could no longer perform at the level he was performing. And he became a drag on the whole team. In addition, as I said, a little level levels the whole lump. You going out on a night before we have a major game and fetting and lying with women and coming in half drunk in the morning. What is that going to do for the rest of the team? It's bad for the team morale. That would infect the whole team. So the coach had to say, well, listen, you either shape up or you ship out. And he refused to. So they benched him and then they fired him. He had to go and ended up playing football in North America at a fairly, somewhere in his late 20s, early 30s. He died a couple of years ago at 50-something years old. But look at the promise that he had, that he refused to live up to what was required of him. And so, what the potential could have been, he lost. So, Paul is putting these things to us now. Cleansing ourselves from filthiness of the flesh, so that we could be sons and daughters to the Lord God Almighty. And we will get back a little bit there to filthiness of the spirit. How does filthiness of the spirit come about? It says perfecting holiness. No, perfecting. What is perfecting? Perfecting is taken from the Greek epiteleo. E-P-I-T-E-L-E-O. Epiteleo. And it means to fulfill further or completely. So that is to execute. So you're doing something, you're executing completely. It says to terminate or to end up something, to undergo, to accomplish, to do something, to finish it, to make perfect, to perform in a perfect manner. And it is taken from a root, teleo, which we had looked at some time ago. I think it was in Hebrews 2, I think. Yeah, Hebrews 2. And verse 10, it says, for it became him for whom are all things, and by whom are all things, in bringing many sons unto glory, to make the captain of their salvation perfect. It is the same word here that is applying to Christ now. To make the captain, make Christ perfect through sufferings. So that is the same word that is being used here. It is the root of perfecting. It means likewise to complete, to execute, to conclude, to discharge as in a debt. When you discharge a debt, it means you paid up everything, you don't owe anything anymore. So you are perfecting it now. Nothing can be held against you. To accomplish, to make an end of something, to expire, to fill up, to finish, to pay, to perform, all of these in perfecting. And this is linked now to the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth, as he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, when he says, therefore let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, neither with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Meaning now that is how we must be. This is what we must be reflecting. The unleavened bread of sincerity and truth, which is symbolic now of Christ and his righteousness. So that henceforth, as we move out of these days, or not as we move out of these days, but our lives should be reflecting the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Because Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us. He's already sacrificed. And in the same way, as the literal thing was when they observed it, when the days of unleavened bread came along, and the Passover, they would go and clean their houses and get rid of it leaven, so that their days of unleavened bread, they could do it with no leaven. But our Passover isn't going to be sacrificed at a particular time. He's already been sacrificed. So that we must be in a permanent state of cleaning the house, of getting rid of leaven. Permanently. There is no ceasing. So what, not the days have ended. We don't go back to accumulating. We must permanently be removing, going down on our knees with feathers, whatever, and getting rid of every particle wherever we find it. And as they said, with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth, it's electrinius, with the sunlight shining now within your houses. Wherever little corner is going to go, it's going to shine so you could see the particles. That is how we must be. And that is the kind of vigilance and diligence that he is saying that we must adopt. Now, back to 2 Corinthians chapter 7. Cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness. Holiness is taken from the Greek word hagiosune. 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 It says it means sacredness. And it refers now to the quality of the holiness. From a root hagios, which means sacred, physically pure, morally blameless, or religious, certified as consecrated. And when you consecrate something, you are reserving it for a special purpose, a special religious and holy purpose. Most holy, and it could refer to the most holy one or the most holy thing. That's what holiness means. A saint, not our concept of saints, but from what the Bible refers to as saints, people who have had, as they say, had their sins washed in the blood of the Lamb. And that is taken from hagnos, the root now. Hagiosune, the root, is from hagnos. It means clean. And figuratively, it says, it means innocent, modest, perfect, chaste, clean, pure. And you know what chaste means. You're in our human life, etc. You're undefiled from sexual impurities, etc. So, we're perfecting holiness. Now, this is a difficult concept to try to imagine here. How do you perfect holiness? How do you make holiness perfect? I don't know. But I think I understand what he is trying to say. The process of doing it, or the mechanism by which you do it, I don't know. But the point that he's trying to make. If you can imagine yourselves, as we say, as being perfect, we do nothing wrong per se. Now that is one aspect of it. But holiness goes beyond just not doing wrong. Holiness means you cannot be tainted, so that nothing that you could consider being wrong will ever come near you. You cannot be tainted with any corrupt things. So how do you perfect that? I don't know. It suggests that maybe you're taking it to another level, so that you cannot be tainted with anything. You're consecrated, you are blameless, you are set aside, you're separated from any corrupt things.